Throughout the annals of time, humanity has endured the onslaught of pandemics, varying in magnitude and ferocity. These trials are chronicled in ancient scriptures like the Bible, emerging during the reigns of Roman emperors such as Justinian and persisting even in the wake of the First World War. However, the era defined by the Black Death marked an unparalleled chapter in human anguish. The saga of the Black Death unfolds as a narrative of perfect convergence, a moment where the growth of urban centers, the bargaining human populace, the expansion of trade, and opportune political condition intersected with a profoundly lethal bacterium and its equally potent mode of transmission. This affliction garnered numerous titles: the Black Death, the Plague, the Great Mortality, among others. Its infamy arises from its staggering toll, with estimates suggesting that 30 to 40% of Europe met their demise. Yet, Europe did not shoulder this burden alone. The wave of devastation extended across Africa, the Middle East, India, and East Asia. Ultimately, it's believed that approximately 20 million people succumbed globally, an unparalleled figure, especially considering the world's population at the time hovered around 500 million. The catastrophe doesn't lie within the confines of Europe, but far to east. The exact birthplace of the plague's emergence remains veiled in uncertainty, though consensus leans toward its lurking somewhere amidst the expansive terrain where the Eurasian steppe converges with the Gobi Desert. Some theories posit its genesis on the Mongolian plateau or within the desolation of the desert itself, a landscape Marco Polo likened to domain where solitary travelers were tormented by eerie voices and the wind stirred countless apparitions. Others speculate it dwelled along the shores of Lake Isaac Cole, one of the deepest lakes globally, patiently waiting its moment. Left to its own devices, the plague would have confined its devastation to small rodents and animals, limited by its deadly potency. However, by the mid-14th century, the steppe had undergone a metamorphosis under the Pax Mongolica, and trade had surged to unprecedented levels. What was once a barren and secluded expanse now crisscrossed with the arteries of the Silk Roads. Traversed by bustling crowds of merchants with aspirations of striking gold, the route featured numerous trading posts and oasis rest stops. Moreover, to facilitate essential communication crucial for sustaining bureaucracy of the fragmented Mongol Empire, they instituted the Riders of the Yam, similar to a Mongolar version of the Polar Express. This inadvertently opened a channel for the spread of the plague, eagerly waiting its chance to proliferate. In the crown far to the west lay the city of Caffa. In the mid-13th century, it was merely a humble fishing village, yet on the brink of transformation. Trade, dormant since the decline of the Roman Empire, surged as a formidable force showcased by Italian city-states fiercely vying for the economic supremacy. Not even the breach of Constantinople's walls by the Fourth Crusade in 1204 deterred their expansionist aspirations, as aptly stated in the Ferengi Rule of Acquisition, number 95, expand or die. 1266, the Genoese descended upon Caffa, morphing it into a bustling urban city. By 1314, its population skyrocketed to 80,000, with likely markets, a skyline dotted with structures, and docks bustling with over 200 ships, conveniently nested along the Silk Roads. Caffa became a haven for shrewd entrepreneurs, strategically positioned at the intersection of numerous routes into Europe. Don rivers lay nearby, enhancing its commercial influence. From its warm water port, vessels sailed to and from Constantinople, the Levant, Italy, and even as far as Iberia. In a short span, Caffa flourished into a prominent hub for importing luxury goods from both the East and West. However, as often observed in history, the rise of one civilization typically coincides with the decline of its neighbors. The Mongol Empire remains one of the most expansive land empires in history. By the time Kublai Khan passed away in 1294, it had fragmented into 4 distinct khanates. Each pursued its own agenda and methods. Yet their division belied their individual strength. Each Khan wielded significant power, with the Golden Horde asserting the dominance over Crimea. This region constituted only a fraction of their vast territory. The armies of the Golden Horde, to some extent, comprised Tartars, a nomadic tribe from eastern Mongolia, subdued during the era of Genghis Khan. They were assimilated into Mongolian forces, aiding in the empire's westward expansion. By the mid-14th century, the Golden Horde heavily relied on Tartars to governments. In this narrative, it becomes evident that Caffa, and indeed presence of Genoese, owed its establishment solely to acquiescence of the Golden Horde. The territory where the trading city flourished was essentially granted with the sole intention of enriching the Khanate's treasury. However, in the 2 decades leading up to the early 1340s, tensions simmered between the Mongols and the Genoese on political, economics, and religious fronts. As a result, by 1343, only a small trigger was necessary to escalate a delicate situation into outright hostility. Not far from Caffa was a thriving trading center of Tana, nested snugly at the mouth of the Don River. Recognized as the gateway to China, it was in this place that a minor dispute on a market street escalated into a violent riot, resulting in a bloodshed, notably the death of a Muslim at the hands of an Italian. According to the tale, nevertheless, word of the incident spread, prompting the local Mongol Khan, Yani Beg, to march upon the city gates with a formidable Tartar army in tow. Of defending Islam, he demanded the surrender of the city, adhering to the customary Mongol protocol. Tana faced the decision of either fully submitting to the terms of surrender or risking complete destruction through resistance. Choosing defiance, the Genoese responded to Yani Beg's demands with insolence, a choice they would soon come to regret. Taken aback by the city's boldness, the assailants launched an attack on Tana with ferocity, swiftly overpowering its defenses. Nevertheless, a few defenders managed to evade capture and flee back to Caffa, closely pursued by the Tartar army, fueled by a fervent desire to punish the Italians for their defiance. To the Mongol Khan, these proud and opulent Genoese had fortified their right to coexist within the Khanate. However, as previously mentioned, Caffa's defenses were formidable, leading to a prolonged siege by the Tartar army and their Khan. As time passed, another force appeared on the horizon, trailing behind the Tartar horsemen. Sometime around 1346, whispers of an unfamiliar illness began spreading westward. Initially ignored, these rumors described vast areas falling to devastation, with population ravaged by a mysterious plague in China and India. Slowly, tales of this sickness reached Russia chroniclers by early 1346, detailing its arrival along the Caspian Sea. Within a year, it had crossed the Don and Volga rivers, penetrated the Crimean Peninsula, and infiltrated an unsuspecting Tartar army. Shortly thereafter, the encampment succumbed to the contagion, with deaths mounting rapidly. To the Genoese within their fortified walls, this epidemic seemed like divine retribution against their enemies. Yet, they would soon realize the fallacy of their beliefs. Within the Tartar camp, conditions worsened daily, with deaths surpassing the capacity for care. The scene resembled a horrific tableau, with decomposing corpses piled high, emitting an unbearable stench that spurred survivors to action. Appalled by the odor, the Khan ordered the corpses loaded onto catapults and hurled towards the city, hoping the repulsive smell would force surrender. a desperate tactic. It's important to note that the bodies had significantly decomposed before being used as weapons. During decomposition, gases accumulate within different layers, such as fascia and internal organs, leading to putrefaction. As a result, upon being propelled with force and colliding with solid structures, some bodies didn't merely impact and collapse. Instead, they fragmented and released aerosolized particles, saturating the surrounding area and showering unfortunate bystanders below. For weeks on end, the trial persisted, inundating the city with the remnants of its wrath. Soon thereafter, the rats that dwelled nearby swiftly traced the scent, ushering the plague into the very core of the city. The once confident Genoese, ensconced behind their defenses and ridiculing their foes, now bore witness to the specter of death prowling through their streets, homes, and structures. What made the plague especially lethal was its nearly flawless mode of transmission: rats and fleas, perfectly suited to propagate the disease. The black rat, serving as a primary carrier, emerged in Asia millennia ago, around 10 to 15,000 years in the past. Despite being smaller than its brown rat counterpart, it compensates with its remarkable reproductive abilities. For instance, a pair of rats mating continuously over 3 years could yield a staggering offspring count exceeding 3 million. Furthermore, it possesses remarkable resilience, capable of scaling almost sheer surfaces, wriggling through tiny openings, and surviving falls from considerable heights. Interestingly, the term rodent traces back to the Latin roder, meaning to gnaw, highlighting its formidable jaw strength, capable of piercing lead, adobe, and unhardened concrete. Against such adversaries, medieval cities' fortifications stood little chance. Now, once you find yourself within a city's boundaries, it's akin to being aboard a vessel. There's a certain cunning to it, capable of addressing challenges with remarkable wit. Upon establishing its territory, whether a nest or burrow, it meticulously devises an escape plan before cautiously venturing forth in search of sustenance. Essentially, it engages in reconnaissance, swiftly altering its exploration paths to adapt to shifts in its environment. Yet, perhaps the most unsettling aspect is its role as an ideal breeding ground for the fleas. The oriental flea, scientifically dubbed Zeopsela copes, but more commonly known as the rat flea for evident reasons, prefers to feast on rats or other rodents. However, if its favored food source becomes scarce or eradicated, it readily seeks alternatives, while awaiting fresh dining prospects. It exhibits remarkable patience, enduring over a month without a host. Throughout this period, it finds solace among garments, bags, fur, hair, and even bodies flung through the air. Upon detecting a potential prey, its sturdy hind legs facilitate leaps of over half a meter. Upon landing, its powerful bite penetrates directly into the host's bloodstream, facilitating feeding. Typically, blood would smoothly flow into the flea's stomach post-meal. However, in cases of plague-infested fleas, the scenario takes a drastic turn. Once infected, the plague bacterium multiplies within the flea, blocking its foregut and hindering its feeding ability. Consequently, the flea becomes even hungrier, leading to multiple bites, each infecting plague bacteria into the host. This leads us to the primary culprit, the bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It's essential to emphasize that this is not a virus. Viruses operate differently with distinct infectivity mechanisms. Once Yersinia pestis infiltrates the human host, it proliferates rapidly, utilizing unique enzymes to invade organs and the lymphatic system. While the lymphatic system typically serves as a cornerstone of the body's immune defense, it becomes the plague's new habitat. a somewhat counterintuitive development. The plague's remarkable adaptivity enables it to evade the otherwise proficient human immune system. Meanwhile, as the immune system is occupied, Yersinia pestis spreads from one lymph node to another at an alarming pace. Caffa, devoid of germ theory and epidemiology knowledge, and with antibiotics centuries away, this affliction seemed nothing short of an imminent apocalypse. By April of 1347, sand traces remained of the Tartar army encamped near Caffa. With the arrival of the spring rains, the lingering survivors had departed, carrying the plague that now raged within the city to distant lands. Yet, even before their departure, the contagion had firmly established itself within Caffa, presenting a scene of utter horror, vividly depicted by John Kelly and his book, The Great Mortality. Streets swarmed with wild beasts scavenging among human remains, while rampaging soldiers looted and assaulted, and elderly women dragged corpses through the debris. Flames and smoke engulfed burning buildings, casting an eerie glow across the Crimean Sea, as rodents infested and bodies lay piled like kindling in every public square, each eye reflecting a blend of frantic terror and resigned despair. The harbor, Caffa's only avenue of escape during the siege, was no less terrifying. Crowds surged against sword-wielding guards amidst the agonized cries of children orphaned by loss or death, amid a cacophony of shouts and curses. Amid the tumult, a frantic rush ensued as people clamored for passage onto departing ships, creating scenes of chaos. Amidst the fervent prayers of passengers beneath the unfurling sails, unaware of the lurking danger below deck where plague-bearing rats roamed. The atmosphere was tense. Caffa, known for its grandeur, boasted a port capable of hosting nearly 200 vessels. Yet, at this juncture in history, panic gripped the populace, with escape being their sole objective. Thus, it was not just one Genoese gallery that managed to set sail, but several, embarking on a perilous journey southward through the Black Sea, navigating treacherous waters like the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara. Their destinations lay in bustling ports scattered throughout the Mediterranean world. The era into which the plague was spreading seemed tailor-made for a pandemic. Starting from the 13th century, trade bargained exponentially, not only over land but also across seas. The maritime routes and commercial pathways of the Mediterranean served not only to enrich nations but were also indispensable for the prosperity of any bargaining power. Consequently, ports and harbors flourished to meet his demand, evolving into strategically vital hubs as the world ventured into global interconnectedness. Over time, it became common to encounter luxurious Chinese goods being traded in Italy, France, and even England. Furthermore, the lead-up to the 14th century witnessed a significant surge in human population. This period experienced prolonged favorable weather, leading to remarkable crop yields and constantly more abundant sustenance for growing populations. Europe's population soared, estimated to have reached between 75 to 80 million. However, this era of prosperity met its downfall. By 1330s, weather patterns took a turn for the worse, compounded by ecological calamities such as droughts, earthquakes, and floods. Notably, these ecological upheavals played a pivotal role in instigating rat migrations. As crops began to fail, rural populations faced escalating malnutrition, prompting a migration towards urban centers. Unfortunately, urban planning failed to keep pace with this massive influx, resulting in disorganized, overcrowded, and increasingly unsanitary cities. Inadequate waste management saw refuse accumulating in every nook, while sewage was crowdedly disposed of onto the streets, turning them into veritable open sewers. Moreover, the early 14th century stands out as one of the most harrowing periods in military annals. In his work, The Great Mortality, John Kelly vividly portrays this epoch as certain. Few endeavors has been intertwined with pestilence as warfare, spanning from Caffa to Vietnam and Afghanistan, and few epochs have witnessed as much brutality as the 14th century. Break of the plague, conflicts referrated. Scots clashed with the English battled the French skirmished with the Flemings, and Italians and the Spaniards turned against each other. Noteworthy is the transformation in warfare dynamics during these savage conflicts, characterized by larger armies, bloodier battles, intensified targeting of civilians, and widespread destruction of property, all facilitating the spread of diseases on the medieval battlefield. Caffa embarked on varied journeys. In the summer of 1347, some of these vessels made port in Constantinople, where the plague disembarked, claiming the lives of an estimated 50 to 70% of the populace. Demetrios Kydonis, a court scholar and eyewitnesses, mourned, "Each passing day witnesses the burial of our friends, leaving the city incuriously desolate. Graveyards multiplied as people avoided each other out of fear of contagion, forsaking traditional rites. Fathers no longer buried their sons, and sons neglected their filial duties." From the illustrious city on the Bosphorus, the plague commenced its journey inland in two directions. It spread westward through Bulgaria, Greece, and Romania, then northward to Poland. To the east, it diffused across Asia Minor before penetrating Persia. However, the Genoese vessels originating from Caffa persisted. They sailed south through the Dardanelles, reaching ports in Cyprus, the Levant, Egypt, and eventually Sicily. In 347, 12 Genoese galleries anchored in Messina, marking the inaugural appearance of the Great Mortality in the historical records. Local authorities, upon the arrival of these ships, encountered numerous afflicted individuals, many teetering on the brink of death, their bodies marred by the lesions. Stacks of corpses were later discovered below deck. After much elaboration, the decision to exile these vessels arrived too belatedly. The city fell victim to the relentless grip of the Black Death, which spread swiftly across the entire island, claiming on average a third of its inhabitants. Similar to Constantinople, the plague advanced over land, swiftly crossing the Strait of Messina to begin its ascent up the Italian peninsula, eventually reaching Rome several months later. In retrospect, it was calculated that the plague moved at an average pace of approximately 2.5 miles per day, traversing rivers, scaling mountain passes, and infiltrating nearly every city it encountered. However, this was its overland journey. The plague-ridden ships previously mentioned, forced to depart Messina, embarked on new voyages. The sailors aboard, miraculously surviving, continued their trade endeavors as best as they could, prioritizing their commercial pursuits. With their profit margin in the wind, they set sail for Marseille, Guinea, Malta, Tunis, and various ports in Spain, Sardinia, and Corsica, among others. Genoa, their homeland with an approximate population of 19,000, fell victim to infection in late November, with mortality rates ranging from 30 to 40%. Marseille suffered a similar fate, emerging as a primary entry point to France. From there, the plague spread northward, reaching Avignon by January of the following year. In January 1348, Venice, bustling with an estimated 120,000 inhabitants, also succumbed to the epidemic. The Venetian authorities responded with swift and stringent measures, bordering on ruthlessness. The Great Council declared the seizure and inspection of all incoming ships. Vessels showing even the faintest sign of plague were promptly incinerated. A strict quarantine was enforced on a nearby isolated island. The term quarantine itself derives from the Italian quarantina giorni, meaning 40 days, duration for which ships and their crews were isolated. A municipal fleet of gondolas plead the canals, echoing the eerie cry of corpses, prompting residents to dispose of their deceased into awaiting vessels. Their bodies were then systematically laid to rest and designated burial sites. Despite tireless efforts, the death toll surges to exceed 60%, with an estimated 72,000 lives lost. The rapid and astonishing mortality rates frequently resulted in the collapse or disappearance of societal frameworks. However, the Venetian government rose to the challenge, enacting severe measures and imposing martial law as society hovered on the brink of chaos. Despite civilization hanging by a thread, Venice valiantly endeavored to maintain order, even as bubonic plague relentlessly advanced, leaving devastation in its wake. The period preceding 1348 proved tumultuous for Florence. The city grappled with floods, diseases, droughts, and famine. Concurrently, domestic and international conflicts brewed. Genoese clashed with Venice, while tensions simmered between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. Adding to these troubles, Edward III of England, reliance on Florentine banks for financing the 100 Years' War, defaulted on his loans, plunging Florence into financial turmoil. Consequently, in the spring of 1348, the plague descended upon the city. Unknown to its inhabitants, a calamity loomed on the horizon. The onset of the plague, characterized by the sudden appearance of purple-black swelling known as the baboons in the armpit and groin, caught everyone off guard. Subsequent symptoms included bloody vomits, high fevers, delirium, and tragically, widespread mortality. Society swiftly disintegrated in the face of the catastrophe. Entire families and neighborhoods were decimated within days, inciting panic on an unprecedented scale. Riots and looting spread, while some sought refuge by barricading themselves indoors, abandoning the afflicted to their fate. Many attempted to flee the city to escape the unfolding carnage. Historical approximations suggest that approximately half of the Florence population fell victim to the plague. Giovanni Boccaccio, purportedly an eyewitness to these events, lamented the absence of aid given to the dying, underscoring the staggering death toll that overwhelmed both witnesses and survivors alike. Consequently, many departed this world without the comfort of loved ones, their passing mourned by few amidst the chaos and despair. He vividly describes a chilling scene, portraying how expensive trenches were excavated in churchyards to accommodate the overwhelming influx of corpses. These bodies were then piled layer upon layer, resembling cargo within a ship, and thinly veiled with soil until the trench overflowed with the deceased. The term plague pit emerged later to encapsulate the grim reality of such mass graves. Yet, the horror extended beyond this. By the onset of heavy spring rains, the remains would resurface and scatter throughout the city, becoming a grim banquet for rats, pigs, and even dogs. Witnessing this spectacle could only evoke image of an impending apocalypse. The plague boasted an alarmingly high mortality rate, with an incubation period spanning from 1 day to a week. Infected individuals could unwittingly spread the disease even prior to exhibited symptoms. There existed 3 primary variants of the plague. The bubonic form, while comparatively less lethal, induced symptoms akin to influenza, including high fevers and bloody coughs, as Yersinia pestis wreaked havoc on the body's organs, sometimes resulting in internal gangrene. In its advanced stages, individuals emitted a scent indicative of internal decay. The contagion would then progress to the lymphatic system, causing agonizing swelling in the groin, armpits or neck, known as the plague boils, which could lead to severe disfigurement. Ruptured lymph nodes could release infectious fluids, exacerbating the spread of the disease. The bubonic variants carried a mortality rate of roughly 60%, providing the highest likelihood of survival among plague victims. The pneumonic form, affecting the lungs, induced rapid episodes of vomiting and coughing up blood, proving highly contagious, particularly in cramped winter settings. Once symptoms resurfaced, individuals typically faced a mere 3 days to live, with mortality rates soaring to 95 to 100% depending on the locale. The septicemic variant, the most fatal, ensued with the bacteria infiltrated the bloodstream, inducing swift shock and shutdown of bodily functions. With no prospect of recovery, the duration from the onset of illness to demise was a mere 14.5 hours, leaving their relatives stunned to discover their seemingly healthy loved ones lifeless by dawn. Pause for a moment and reflect on how profoundly this could reshape someone's perspective. Imagine how different your outlook would be without any scientific understanding of the situation at hand. The overwhelming scale of death surrounding individuals would be almost incomprehensible. But what caused such devastation? As mentioned earlier, the Black Death was a culmination of various factors. While plagues were not new to humanity, the Black Death stood out to its unprecedented impact. Historical outbreaks like the plague of Justinian in 541-42, linked to Yesenia pestis, pale in comparison to the sheer magnitude and duration of the Black Death. The mid-14th century displayed regular characteristics. It persisted, albeit at a slower pace, even during winter months, which contradicted expectations if fleas were the carriers, as most would die in the cold. Moreover, its contagion rate exceeded that of modern Yersinia pestis strains. Some contemporary forensic scientists speculate that this bacterium may have accomplices. Beyond the conflicts of the time, urban conditions, extensive trade networks, and an efficient transmission vector, the Black Death might have been compounded by the concurrent pandemics, creating a perfect storm. Looking back, there is speculations that anthrax bacteria and Ebola virus may have also played roles, each independently lethal. The widespread impact was worsened by the vast geographical reach, encompassing entire continents like Europe. Plague would sweep through one region only to resurge from another direction in the subsequent waves. Often, these subsequent waves proved even more catastrophic than the initial onslaught. By the middle of 1348, the Black Death had been ramped across Europe for almost a year. Avignon, located in southern France, had run out of burial space due to the overwhelming number of deaths. Originating in Constantinople, the plague had quickly spread into the Balkans, devastating Italy. Historian Giovanni Boccaccio remarked on the pervasive fear and isolation. People avoided each other, neighbors scarcely bothered about others. Such was the terror instilled by this calamity that was even family ties seemed to dissolve. Particularly distressing, almost inconceivable, is the abandonment of children by their own parents, who refused to acknowledge them as their own. Throughout the remainder of the 1348, at an average rate of 2.5 miles per day, the Black Death advanced northward, leaving entire rural communities, sometimes completely obliterated, in its wake. In certain regions, the devastation was so absolute that nature reclaimed land and traces of civilizations were only rediscovered through aerial photographics prior to World War I. By June 1348, the plague had reached one of its main targets, the bustling city of Paris, boasting a population of around 210,000, marking it one of Europe's largest cities. Once the plague took hold, its severity rapidly intensified when it eventually receded a year later. Over half of the city's population had succumbed, leaving behind a haunting silence. However, the worst was yet to unfold. As the plague continued its northward march, it seemed to gain momentum, particularly during the scorching summer days. Its most devastating impact lay ahead. By late summer 1348, fishermen in the England Channel could see plague flags flying from almost every French town and village along the coast. It was only a matter of time before the Black Death unleashed its most sinister onslaught, signaling the beginning of the battle for Britain. Having already wreaked havoc in France and the sea, the plague was poised to inflict unprecedented destruction, claiming lives on the beaches, in its fields, streets, and hills, seemingly unstoppable and relentless. Cities like Paris and Florence, among others, were grappling with dire shortage of burial space for their deceased inhabitants. In the year 1348 CE, England experienced an unusual pleasant summer. The popular King Edward III had ascended to the throne, succeeding the less favored Edward II, whose demise was, to put it mildly, unpleasant. Edward III had gained renown for his triumph over the French at the Battle of the Crécy in 1346. His victorious army regularly transported spoils of war through the ports of the Calais, contributing to the Britain's jubilant atmosphere. However, this flow of goods traversed a French countryside increasingly marked by cities raising the plague flag. Despite the looming threat, trade, especially in coveted English wool, persisted relatively unhindered. In mid-1348, the estimated 80 million English ships far outnumbered the population, underscoring the importance of maintaining commerce, despite the absence of social distancing measures. The Black Death descended with unprecedented ferocity. In hindsight, historians speculate that the plague emanated from Calais, spreading along various points of the Channel coast. Southampton, Portsmouth, and the small port of Malcolm, now part of the Weymouth, were among the initial points of impact. Additionally, Bristol faced an outbreak believed to have originated from a ship carrying French wine from Gascony. The consequences were swift and severe. Henry Knighton, a local monk, vividly described the onset of the plague. A merciless death swiftly engulfed the entire town within a mere 2 days, leaving many to face sudden demise. Now stemming from these two starting points, one along the Channel coast and the other emerging from Bristol, the plague began its march inland using roadways and river networks. While the typical mortality rate in continental Europe cities was about 33%, in England it surged to a staggering 55% on average. Some urban centers experienced even greater losses, with mortality rates reaching as high as 80 to 90% of their population. Many municipalities, overwhelmed by the sheer number of deceased, turned to cremation due to their inability to bury them quickly. Travelers on English roads witnessed a haunting scene of large columns of black smoke rising from all directions, with the ashes of the deceased falling like grim snowfall. The scale of death led to industries shutting down, fields being abandoned, and livestock dying en masse in pastures. While small villages and towns were reclaimed by nature, their streets overrun and swallowed by foliage. By late autumn of 1348, these converging fronts had made their way toward London, a city described by John Kelly, author of The Great Mortality, as having sanitation conditions shockingly poor even by medieval standards, with an estimated population of 80 to 100,000 at the time. London saw over half of its residents fall victim to a particularly deadly 1-2 punch. First, the mnemonic variant, as autumn and winter temperatures forced people indoors, leading to closer contact, and then the bubonic form in spring, as warmer weather brought back fleas and rats. Yet, despite the alarming death toll, the story had only just begun. By 1349, the plague's northward advance mirrored its devastation in France, wiping out cities one after another at an extraordinary high rate within England. By the end of the year, it had reached the borders of Scotland. John Kelly citing primary sources, recounts the Scottish perspective. The Scots, believing erroneously that the plague was an English affliction, celebrated in the summer of 1349, taunting their enemies and anticipating England's downfall. But by March 1350, they had gathered a strong army in Selkirk Forest near the English border, ready for the invasion. Before they could launch their attack, however, divine punishment struck, wiping out the assembly with a sudden, merciless death. This was not an isolated event. Far to the south, the Iberian Peninsula had been struggling with the plague since 1348, reaching the Emirates of Granada in 1349, in the same year that the Scots faced their fate at Cerclure. King Alfonso II of Castile, on the verge of capturing the Gibraltar and defeating the Emirates, saw his army destroyed by Yersinia pestis during the siege. Alfonso II thus became the only reigning European monarch to die from the Black Death. Ironically, while the Castilian army succumbed to the plague, the Emirate of Granada was spared, postponing the Reconquista by another 150 years. In the throes of widespread mortality across the continent, a shattered and desperate Europe sought explanations. Many viewed the plague as divine retribution for human sins, finding solace in religion. Others turned to astrology for answers. In Paris, renowned as a bastion of medical knowledge, the learned master of the Paris medical faculty attributed the Black Death to an unusual celestial alignment of Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter on March 20th, 1345, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. These masters penned a treatise elucidating their territory. The primary cause of this pestilence was, and remains, the celestial alignments that occurred in 1345 at 1 hour after noon, on the 20th March, featuring a significant conjunction of the 3 planets in Aquarius. At the time of the conjunction, many corrupted vapors mingled with the air, disseminated by the frequent gusts of wind. Inhalation of this tainted air corrupted the essence of the spirit, leading to the destruction of life force. It's worth noting that during this era, scientific methodologies, germ theory, and basic hygienic practices such as hand washing were yet to emerge, let alone advancements like fifth fluid administrations, vaccinations, or antibiotics. Medicine during that era harkened back to the teaching of ancient luminaries like Aristotle and Galen, the esteemed physician from the time of Marcus Aurelius. Central to this medical doctrine were the 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, believed to cause illness when imbalanced. Bloodletting was a primary remedy, despite its risk of infection or excessive blood loss, often hastening death. Yet, when this approach failed, new strategies emerged. Boils were lanced to release infectious fluids, occasionally with success, but more often worsening the infection. In desperate cases, concoction of herbs and unfortunately human waste were applied, with little benefit. Another prevailing belief was that the plague spread through miasma, an herbal contagion. Some sought refuge in pristine countryside air, believing it could contract the nauseous vapors. Conversely, others ventured into foul-smelling environments, hoping to neutralize the disease influenza, leading to a rush towards latrines. Similarly, the consumption of non-infected urine gained traction as a remedy, giving rise to a niche industry. For the influence who rejected this treatment, ingesting powdered sapphire was considered effective against the plague. Fire was also employed in the fight against the contagion. Initially, it was applied directly to afflicted bodies, with some resorting to searing hot pokers on boils, a treatment viewed by many as torture. Yet, fire was also believed to purify the air of malevolent vapors and repel fleas. prompting figures like Pope Clement VI to conduct masses between two blazing curves, a practice credited with his survival amidst the plague. Great mortality in Europe, quarantine measures proved notably effective in cities like Milan and vast stretches of Poland. Those displaying initial symptoms of deadly disease were confined within their homes, effectively transforming resistance into Muslims alongside their families. Despite this severity, this strategy yielded results, with Milan reporting a mortality rate as low as 15%, and Poland even lower compared to the rest of this continent. Amidst the chaos of the Great Mortality era, various treatments were attempted, yet none left as indelible a mark as the plague doctors. Encountering one was foreboding experience, often a harbinger of impending doom. Clad in thick leather garments reminiscent of medieval hazmat suits, complete with sturdy boots and gloves, these doctors were almost entirely shielded from direct contact. Their belt-like masks, filled with herbs and flowers to combat putrid odors, contributed to their eerie demeanor. Some masks even featured tinted eyepieces, avoiding direct gaze with patients, believed to reduce the risk of disease transmission. Despite the association with death, these doctors risked their lives to understand and elevate suffering. While some turned to religion for solace, extreme measures such as the flagellant movement emerged, with individuals across Europe engaging in self-flagellation as penance for perceived sins. Though condemned by religious authorities, the flagellant unwillingly aided the spread of disease along their paths. As the Great Mortality claimed innumerable lives, blame increasingly fell on various groups, including the Jewish community. The plague was falsely depicted as a conspiracy orchestrated by an underground Jewish network, contaminating wealth. This sparked ruthless persecution of Jews, marked by corked confessions extracted through torture and subsequent pogroms. Beginning with the infamous incident in Toulon on April 13, 1348, and persisting across Europe. Heinrich Turcus, the canon of Constance, recounted the harrowing events. Between All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1348, and Michaelmas, September 29, 1349, all Jews from Cologne to Austria faced brutal persecution, with many being burned and slaughtered. Reports from Strasbourg painted a grim picture, detailing how half of its Jewish residents were forcibly stripped, paraded into a local cemetery, and immolated within a stone building. Similarly, in Brandenburg, they endured the gruesome fate of being roasted alive on a massive grill. Amidst these dark times, however, there were pockets of refuge. Marseille in southern France notably extended a significant protection, and King Casimir the Great of Poland provided sanctuary for Jewish refugees, even going as far as outlawing their persecution. Pope Clement VI, in a papal bull on July 6, 1348, asserted the Jews cannot be blamed for the plague, as they too suffer from its effect. Yet, despite papal endorsement, not all heeded reason. In some regions less impacted by the plague, Jews were scapegoated and executed. Conversely, in areas where Jews were disproportionately affected, locals justified their killings as divine intervention, perpetuating the violence for years. By late 1349, an estimate 50 to 60% of the British Isles had fallen victim to the plague. However, this was not its sole advance. Progressing at a rate of 2.5 miles per day, it traversed the Rhine, encroaching upon what could eventually become sovereign Germany before advancing toward Vienna. Its reach extended beyond land. The Black Death also crossed the North Sea, infiltrating Scandinavia. Ships were discovered adrift, bearing only mutilated corpses. Bergen was among the first cities hit, marking the beginning of its eastward progression into remote regions. Illustratively, a secluded mountain village suffered near total devastation, with nearly all inhabitants perishing when a rescue party arrived in 1350, almost a year later. They found only one survivor, a young girl named Rippy. Isolated and lacking human interaction, she had regressed into a feral state, hunting wild game like a wolf and losing the ability to communicate verbally. In tales, the plague persisted by 1351. It reached Poland, where its impact was somewhat mitigated. The desperation of cities in King Casimir III's stringent border control and quarantine measures played significant roles. As previously mentioned, plague cases in Poland were confined within their homes by brick walls. Additionally, one theory posits that Poland's surplus of cats helped control the rat population, thereby sparing many lives. By 1352, the plague had reached the gates of Moscow. Unlike the Grand Army or the Vermont, it veered eastward, retracing its path back into the Eurasian steppe, while Europe bore the brunt of devastation. By 1353, the Black Death had run its course. Exists a widely known adage, often attributed to William Yeats, though echoed by various historical figures. The veneer we call civilization is only skin deep. This notion suggests that beneath our civilized exterior, primal instincts lie dormant, ready to emerge. It implies that external pressure could potentially regress us significantly, perhaps even to prehistoric terms. While there may be some validity to this idea, the Black Death remains one of the humanity's most catastrophic stressors. Roughly a third of Europe fell victim to the plague, a toll now believed to be underestimated globally. Over 200 million lives were lost, and social structures crumbled in its wake. Yet, civilization persisted, establishing a new equilibrium, with some arguing that Europe emerged stronger. Its death toll resulted in a surge in labor costs and decline in food prices. The landed gentry found themselves at a disadvantage, forced to pay higher wages, thus improving the living standards of peasants and serfs. Many were able to accumulate wealth to pass down to their children, and those previously tied to the land discovered newfound mobility and job prospects. With labor in high demand, women assumed roles traditionally held by men, further enhancing their social status. Certain historians suggest that this marked the beginning of the end for serfdom. It became a period where entrenched ideologies and institutions faced intense scrutiny. People engaged in deep introspection regarding their own mortality. As a result, the arts, literature, and music underwent significant transformations due to the plague's impact, exemplified by the emergence of the macabre dance genre. Moreover, many scholars argue that a new generation of physicians began questioning conventional treatment methods and outdated beliefs. A growing middle class thirsted for new ideas in literature, while disillusionment with religion institutions hastened Europe towards the Reformation. Undoubtedly, humanity endured considerable upheaval, yet it preserved through the trials of time. In his work, The Great Mortality, captures the sentiment aptly, stating, "After 2.5 centuries, rapid demographic expansions had stained the delicate balance between a populace and resources across the board. Standards of living either stagnated or declined. Poverty, famine, and malnutrition became pervasive. Social mobility remained elusive, innovations was stifled, and novel ideologies were condemned as heretical. The Black Death and subsequent waves of disease catalyzed the dissolution of stagnation, allowing the continent to regain its momentum. A reduced population translated to a more efficient allocation of resources for survivors, promoting judicious resource utilization. Simultaneously, humanity ingenuity flourished as individuals sought to harness machine power instead of relying solely on manual labor. Consequently, the economy diversified, capital utilizations intensified, technological prowess burgeoned, and living standards rose. In some respects, the plague shattered the Malthusian impasse, which would have otherwise kept Europe entrenched in its traditional ways indefinitely. Despite the toll of a century marked by incessant death, Europe emerged from abyss of pestilence revitalized, akin to the sun after a cleansing rain.